I have been the Duke of Ashfern for 14 months, 3 weeks, and, at the time of this particular evening, 4 days, and I had already made one rule for myself that I intended to keep for the rest of my natural life. I would not attend the Aldwych Winter Assembly. My Aunt Lady Sophronia had other plans. She arrived at Ashfern Hall on the 3rd of December with 3 trunks, a spaniel, and a list of young women whose families she considered suitable. I told her I was busy. She said that a man who had spent the last 4 Tuesdays reorganizing his late uncle's cartography collection was not busy. He was hiding, and that the difference mattered. I said I failed to see how. She said that was precisely the problem. By 7:30 that evening, I was in the assembly rooms at Aldwych wearing my best coat and a very determined expression. Determined meaning, I would stand near the wall, I would not dance, I would permit exactly 2 introductions, and I would be in my carriage again before the first supper waltz. The rooms were warm and overbright and smelled of beeswax and powder. Lady Sophronia immediately steered me toward a cluster of mothers near the punch bowl and began what I recognized as her opening conversational gambit. The one that sounds like pleasantries and is actually a sales negotiation. I nodded at the appropriate intervals and kept my eyes moving toward the door. It was the door that saved me, in a manner of speaking. Not the one I came in through, the one at the far end of the east wall, beside which hung a pair of very long damask curtains, in a deep burgundy, that I can still describe to you in precise detail, because I spent approximately 8 minutes behind one of them. I will say, in my own defense, that the curtains were substantial. There was every reasonable expectation of privacy. I slipped behind the left panel, while Lady Sophronia was mid-sentence introducing me to a Miss whoever it was from the neighboring parish. I told myself I was simply stepping out of the draft. I was not stepping out of the draft. I was retreating from a social engagement, the way a sensible general retreats from an unwinnable field, quickly, without announcement, and with the full intention of regrouping. The curtain was dark and quiet. I could hear the music from the floor, muffled, and the percussion of 200 feet, and Lady Sophronia's voice still audible above it all, bless her, carrying magnificently. I gave myself 4 minutes, and then I intended to find my coat. I was at approximately the 2-minute mark when I became aware that I was not alone. There was a sound, specifically, the sound of someone trying very hard not to make a sound, and then a small gap appeared at the edge of the curtain, and then a young woman slipped through it, turned around, and found me standing 18 inches away in the dark. She said, in a whisper that had considerable feeling behind it, "Wrong curtain." I said nothing for a moment, because there did not seem to be anything useful to say. Then I said, also in a whisper, "Is there a right one?" She stared at me. She had brown eyes and a sensible face, and the expression of a person making rapid calculations about a problem they had not budgeted for. She was not, I noticed, wearing the expression of someone delighted to find herself behind a curtain with the Duke of Ashfern, which was either unusual or refreshing, and I was not quite sure which. "I was here first," she said. "You were not," I said. "I have been here for 2¼ minutes." She appeared to consider this. "I am hiding from Mr. Fentwell. I am hiding from Lady Sophronia Ashfern." A pause. "Is she, are you?" "My aunt, yes. Gideon Ashfern." She processed this with the air of someone absorbing moderately inconvenient information. "Philippa Marsh. My father is Dr. Marsh. My mother has been encouraging Mr. Fentwell's attentions for 6 weeks, and I find him, he has an opinion about everything, and no desire whatsoever to be corrected." "An exhausting combination," I said. "Extremely." We stood there for another moment, in the warm dark behind the burgundy damask, and then the curtain swayed because someone on the other side twitched it, and it swayed back, and a slant of candlelight fell across us both, and the someone, it turned out to be Mrs. Harcastle of the Assembly Committee, who missed nothing, opened the curtain entirely. She looked at us, we looked at her, then she looked out at the room, which had not yet noticed, and then back at us with the expression of a woman determining what to do with an extraordinary piece of information. What she did was take 3 steps back into the room and say, at a volume calibrated for maximum range, that she believed Mr. Ashfern and Miss Marsh had found each other at last, and wasn't it perfectly charming? The Aldwych Winter Assembly had its verdict before the supper waltz after all. I should say here that I did not correct it. I had several opportunities. In the carriage afterward, my aunt said, with barely contained joy, that she had not engineered this, and I needn't look at her that way. I told her I believed her. She said that, nonetheless, if I intended to disoblige Miss Marsh by letting the county think one thing and then doing another, I would have to explain myself to her personally, and that she had found Miss Marsh to be a very sensible young woman in the 3 minutes she'd spoken with her after the curtain incident, and that sensible young women were rare, and that I was aware of this, and that I should think carefully. I thought carefully, all the way back to Ashburn Hall, about cartography, and about brown eyes, and about the particular shape of a person who has an opinion, and no fear of expressing it to a stranger in the dark behind a burgundy curtain. In the morning I sent a note to Dr. Marsh's house, asking if Miss Marsh would care to walk the east part of the estate that afternoon, as the weather had improved. She arrived at 2:30, in a brown cloak and sensible boots, and told me immediately that she had come to be clear about our situation, which was that she had not agreed to anything, and neither had I, and we should not allow the county's assumptions to make the decision for us. I said that was a very reasonable position. She said she was glad I agreed. I said I had made no position of my own yet, and that the walk might help me form one. She walked beside me for an hour and a half. She asked about the cartography collection. Apparently my aunt had mentioned it, and I told her about it, and then she said that she had her own system for the Aldwych Lending Library's shelving, which the librarian had twice ignored, and I said that seemed like a significant oversight, and she said she thought so too, and that the problem was that the current system organized by acquisition date rather than by subject or author, and the result was that no one could find anything, and everyone blamed the library, when in fact they should blame the method. I found this so completely reasonable that I laughed. I am not certain I had laughed since the autumn. She looked at me sideways when I did it, with an expression I did not fully understand at the time. The walk ended at the south gate. She shook my hand, actually shook it, like a man, and said good afternoon, and went back down the lane. I watched her go, and then stood at the south gate for several minutes, doing nothing useful. Then I went back to the hall, and reorganized 3 drawers of nautical charts by date of expedition, which is a thing I do when I have feelings I have not yet located proper words for. The weeks that followed had a particular quality I had not experienced in 14 months of dukedom, which was, I looked forward to things. I looked forward to Tuesday morning calls, at which Philippa would sit in the yellow drawing room at Ashburn Hall and argue with me about estate drainage and the relative merits of Wordsworth, in whom she had very little interest. I looked forward to the lending library, which we had begun visiting on Wednesdays, nominally to consult its collection of county histories, but actually to continue the argument about its organization, which had expanded to include the question of whether subject-based shelving ought to prioritize the reader's likely intent or the scholar's precision, a disagreement so pleasurable that I began to think we were extending it deliberately. I had dinner twice at the Marsh house, where Dr. Marsh asked me about my late uncle's medical collections, and Mrs. Marsh watched me with the satisfaction of a woman whose plan is proceeding well, despite the fact that she had not had a plan. And I had Philippa to dinner once at Ashburn Hall, just her and Lady Sophronia and myself, and afterward Philippa walked through the cartography room, while Sophronia made herself conveniently absent, and Philippa ran her finger along the edge of one of the older charts, and asked who had made it, and I told her, and she listened to the whole account without looking away. That evening I was extremely busy reorganizing nothing in particular for approximately an hour after she left. My aunt said nothing, which was louder than anything she might have said. It was in the 6th week that I began to understand what the Southgate feeling had been. It was also in the 6th week that I noticed Philippa had begun to say things that sounded, when I assembled them in the quiet of my study afterward, like a woman preparing a graceful exit, not through coldness, nothing so obvious, but through a small and careful gentling of tone, as if she were beginning to pad the edges of our conversations, the way one pads a parcel for a long journey. She said once, of Lady Sophronia, that she must be so glad to see the hall in better spirits. She said once, of the estate, that it was looking very well managed, and that I seemed to have found my footing. Both statements were kind. Both statements sounded, underneath their kindness, like goodbyes written in advance. I sat with this information for 4 days. I reorganized nothing during those 4 days. I was not in the right mood for charts. On the morning of the 7th week, she came to the hall and asked if she might speak with me privately, and I showed her into the vicarage, the parlor, my mind was already supplying incorrect words, into the drawing room, and we sat, and she folded her hands in her lap and drew a breath and began. She said, "Your Grace, I want to say something that I hope you will receive in the spirit in which it is." "No," I said. She stopped. She looked at me with the rapid calculation expression. "I haven't finished. I know what you are going to say. You cannot possibly. You are going to release me," I said, "from the county's assumption. You are going to say that we have both behaved with perfect propriety, and that nothing has been agreed between us, and that I am in no way obligated, and that you hope we shall continue as we are, as neighbors and friends, and people who argue about library shelving. You have been drafting that speech for approximately 10 days, and I would like very much if you would not give it." She sat very still. The morning light came through the drawing room window and fell across her brown cloak. She had not taken it off, and her sensible face, which at this particular moment had the expression of a woman who has had the ending of her carefully prepared sentence taken away from her. "Why?" she said at last. "Because," I said, "I have been hiding behind curtains my entire life. Not the literal kind. I only did that once, and you were there. But the other kind, from the estate, from the title, from every room that expected something of me, I had decided I didn't know how to give. And I have spent 7 weeks not hiding, for the first time in as long as I can remember, and the reason for that is sitting across from me in a brown cloak, and I would rather not have it leave." She looked at me for a long moment. Then she said, "That is a very long way of saying something simple." "I am aware," I said. "Miss Marsh, Philippa, will you marry me?" It was not a question. She noticed. "You haven't asked," she said. "You've stated." "Old habit," I said. "I can rephrase." "No," she said. She unfolded her hands. "It will do. We were married in February, in her father's church, small, cold, and perfectly quiet except for Lady Sophronia, weeping with complete composure in the front pew, which she would afterward describe as tears of satisfaction rather than sentiment, a distinction she maintained with great firmness. Dr. Marsh shook my hand twice. Mrs. Marsh embraced her daughter for a long time at the church door. Mr. Fentwell was not invited, though he sent a very correct note. The curtains at Aldwych Assembly Rooms, I am told, were replaced that January with a shorter pair. There is no longer anywhere adequate to hide. I have not needed anywhere to hide since February.